The topic for today's lecture is the design process. Now, as designers, we're going to learn that design is really something that does involve a process, starting from point A and finishing in point Z, being the finished product. Very rarely as designers do we just sit down and start creating ideas immediately and expecting that we're going to have a great product in the end. The truth is that there is a process that we have to follow, and today we're going to talk about that process. And this is going to be very important because in all of our projects and exercises, we're going to implement this type of process. So let's get started. So let's define the word design first. Design means to plan or organize. In other words, it has to be something that shows intelligence behind it. It's not randomness and it's not chaos. It's not like in nature, although a lot of people can make the argument that nature is very well designed through either religious explanations or evolution. But as designers, we have to plan our pieces that we create, and there has to be some thinking behind that, and our pieces that we create have to reflect that kind of thinking. So take a look at this example here. We have a very interesting poster, and it says, "It's time to get organized." Now this is a very good example of design because it shows something that is somewhat chaotic, but it is planned and created in such a way that it is still legible, and it captures the idea of something being disorganized in a very interesting way. And as you can see here, there's no effects, there's no gimmicks. It's a very simple idea, but very, very well executed. And that really is what design is all about. Design is about organizing things in a visual manner. Design is very, very visual. It's 100% visual. Here's a couple of interesting quotes that I like very much. Design is essentially the opposite of chance, which goes back to what we were speaking about earlier, about it being planned. And the second one reads, "Artists or designers plan the arrangement of elements to form a visual pattern." So this is one thing we're going to start learning, and another thing we're going to realize is that it takes a lot of practice, it takes a lot of hard work, and we can't expect to get perfect results right from the get-go. So it's going to take some perseverance, and that's really what we're going to go through in this class with you guys, and I look forward to doing that as well. Now, a lot of people compare design to art, and there is a lot of overlap, but one thing that I want to make clear is that design is not art, right? One thing you have to think about is what are the differences between art and design, and what do they have in common? And those are things that we're going to have discussions about in this class, but one thing I want to make clear is that design is really not art. Art doesn't have to have a rhyme or reason necessarily. There's no right or wrong necessarily. But when it comes to design, there are some rules and some principles that we're going to be learning about. So art really is problem solving. And so a quote that you might hear very often is, "There are no rules in art." And I think that's perfectly true. In art, there are no rules. Sometimes there's a debate about what things even qualify as art. Sometimes some art exhibitions that we might see might be very strange or very foreign, or we might have disagreements on whether it is art or not, but it is not design. And being a good artist is very helpful to being a good designer because there's a lot of overlap. But then we're going to start seeing what the separation is. So we're going to see that there are some guidelines in design. Design has rules. Design has principles, and looking at art is very, very helpful, but it is not going to be the only source for guidance. And we're going to learn these rules, and you can break all the rules in the world, but before you break them, you have to learn them, and you have to implement them, and you have to respect them. And in the rules in design, we call them the principles of organization, and we're going to look at that in a separate lecture. So when we talk about design, we have to separate two things: the content and the form. So content is what is the message, what is inside, what is it trying to communicate. So and the form is what does it look like. So if you have a website, the content is how How good are the stories in the website? Is it information that keeps me engaged? Is it information that makes me want to come back? And then the forum relates to, does the website look good? Does it look clean? Does it look organized? Does it look pleasing to the eye? And as designers, we have to worry about both of these things. We can't have something that has a great content but looks very ugly. And on the flip side, we can't have something that looks really, really great but is very boring. So it has to be engaging and it has to be visually interesting. And that really is at the heart of what design is all about. Aesthetics is another word we're going to talk about a lot here. And aesthetics refers to our visual reaction to a piece. So it relates to visuals. And aesthetics is very close to beauty. When we say something is beautiful, it has aesthetics, it adheres to principles of aesthetics, it is something visually stimulating, and it is something, again, that takes practice, and it takes time to develop an eye for aesthetics. And we want to be designers that create things that are aesthetically pleasing. Pictures. We've heard also the quote, "A picture is worth 1,000 words." Pictures can be an incredible way of communicating. Sometimes just putting one picture next to another one can create a funny juxtaposition or an irony. We're going to look at very great examples of that. But how we use pictures and how we combine those things with other elements such as text can really, really provide for some interesting communication ideas. So what is the connection between art and communication? This is where we start going away from fine arts and we start talking about graphic design, having a simple and interesting message. So if you look at this message here, I think that we can all agree that it's very, very painful to see this image. And it captures the idea of torture very, very well. This is part of a poster for stopping torture. And it communicates very well. We can all relate to the message. It communicates without words in a very simple way. I mean, if you take a look at this example, it's just one color. It's just black on white paper. There's no fancy effects. So as a piece of design, it's very, very successful. And it has an artistic quality to it as well. So those are the things we're going to start practicing and thinking about together as we go forward. So there are three main things that I want us to focus on as we grow as graphic designers, and they're very, very important. Those are thinking, looking, and doing. If you think, if you look, and if you do constantly, you're going to grow as graphic designers. And this is a key thing. I really am against the idea that people are just born with this incredible capacity to just do things. Even those people who are incredibly talented have to work many, many hours into refining their craft. And thinking, looking, and doing really is at the center of what this class is about. And it really is at the center of what I want you all to do in your own work to become better as designers. So let's start with the first one, thinking. So thinking refers to analyzing the problem. What is the problem? What do I need to communicate? When is the deadline, right? Those are things these are the very practical considerations of a piece. What is the medium it's going to be done? For example, is this going to be a website? Is this going to be a brochure? Is this going to be a poster, right? We have to think about all these as well, and we have to think about the message. And then start thinking about, speaking of thinking about the message, you have to think about how is the solution going to be shown? Thinking about the solution. So you have to ask yourselves, how can the concept be shown? And I would add to that, how can you show it in an interesting and different way? We're going to talk about a lot about cliches and ideas that are very unoriginal or very expected or very boring. One of the keys of being a successful designer is communicating something in a completely unique and fresh way. I want you guys to really think in terms of something that is fresh and new. So, possible steps in thinking. Making a list of images or symbols that could represent the theme. Sketching, number 2, is very, very important. And when I say sketching, I don't mean creating finalized, really fine drawings. These are just, they can be chicken scratches in a little journal, just for you guys to develop your ideas. This is very important. Another great thing about sketching is that you don't have the computer with you, so you don't have that distraction of software and technology and connecting to the internet and social media, all those things. Discuss the ideas with other artists or doing some research. For example, reading, going to the library, looking at what's in the news, looking at what's in pop culture. Then after that, narrowing it down to some ideas. And finally, asking yourself how you can show the image in a unique manner to convey it. So if you look around you and you look at good designs, you're going to see that all great designs demonstrate this concept very, very well. If we're talking about how can you show something different in a unique way, here's a very simple. The solutions to this can be very simple or they can be quite complex. But here you have a pencil shown in an interesting and a different manner. And in addition to thinking about all those things that I mentioned right now, thinking about the audience. Who is going to see my work? What is their age? What is their demographic data? What is the target audience? And you have to be able to relate to the target audience. So for example, if you're going to design a logo for a daycare center, it's far different than designing a logo for a law firm, for example. They're very vastly different audiences, and they all have to have their own look and feel. So you have to really be able to be flexible as a designer and adapt to each particular situation. Another thing you're going to think about is form and content. So asking yourselves, what are you going to present? How are you going to show it? And what is going to be the process for revisions? So Raymond Loewy, a very famous industrial and graphic designer, he designed the logo for the Greyhound bus line, as you can see here. He went through many, many versions of this logo, and in the end he settled for the one on the bottom. And if you compare it to the one on the top, they're very similar, but the one on the bottom has a feeling of more agility and more speed, which is what he wanted to go for. And you can see that the only difference between the top and the bottom one is just a couple adjustments of the thickness of the lines here and there, and that really transforms it completely. So that really is the importance of form relating to content. Form and function is another very important thing to think about. And you might have heard the term form follows function, and that means that the form of a piece should be dictated by the function. And this is something we see a lot in architecture, in aerospace engineering, and even landscaping. So the purpose defines the look and shape of the object. And the examples of this are really all around us, and they're very interesting. If you look at an airplane, for example, you can see that this here is an example of a seaplane, an amphibian plane, which is meant to land in the sea. Now, it is not purposely made to look like a fish or a whale that would be in the water, but because of the needs it has to glide through the water and be able to land in it, the form follows function philosophy dictates that it ends up looking like, in this case, a whale. And you don't have to necessarily just get inspiration from nature. The purpose of an object dictates what it's going to look like. Here are some interesting pieces of industrial design, so furniture, bookcases, that type of thing. Of course, they're designed in a very fun and whimsical way, but in the end, its function dictates what it looks like, because it has certain very specific limitations. The second thing we spoke about is looking. So being observational, looking at other people's work, looking at nature, looking at objects, being aware of what's going on in pop culture, looking at history. One of the things I do every day is I check out the Twitter feed for Michael Beirut. I check out AIGA Ion Design. I look at design annuals. And this serves to not just give me some inspiration on a daily basis, but it also allows me to see what's going on, what's being done out there. And it's very, very important to always be observing and always be critiquing too. Not just looking at things that you like, but looking at things that you think don't work well, that you don't like, and thinking, why is it that they don't work well? Why is it that you don't like them? And when you're looking at things, you have to differentiate between the source and the subject. So the source refers to the stimulus for the idea itself, and the content or the subject is the content of the work and the way that you saw that object. History and culture. History and culture are incredibly important. We always say those who forget history are condemned to repeat it. I would say those who don't pay attention to design history are condemned to not be as great designers as they could be. And in this age of mass media with the internet and with TV, it's very hard for us to sometimes slow down and see things in a more deliberate manner. So here's a challenge for you guys to see if can we look at the world in a more slow pace. There can be so many advantages to doing this as designers and as creatives. And take some instructions and some ideas or suggestions from the world of art. I love the phrases, look again, see the relationships. What is the difference between looking and seeing, right? It's like the difference between hearing and listening. Designers see, they don't look. Designers listen, they don't hear. Here's a word that you might have heard before, and it's very common for designers to use, and I might be using it in some of your critiques, vernacular. So when something becomes very common or commonly known, it becomes part of the vernacular. So you could say that a slang word is part of the vernacular. But there's also a visual vernacular. When something is really done a lot visually, it becomes part of the visual vernacular. And this can be overdone as well. So the challenge for you as designers is how can we use the vernacular in an interesting way? Another word for vernacular could be cliche, right? And when we do things, we don't want to necessarily be too cliche and too obvious, right? So how we use these obvious symbols that are out there is very, very important. And then finally, doing. Doing is very important. Experimenting yourselves. I think that all of you as designers should have some work that you do at home, private work, just for fun. Design a logo or create a t-shirt or do a drawing or paint or play the guitar. But anything that's creative, I think, is going to be very, very important. And working with new materials is also very, very special, especially in an age where everything is done on the computer. If you experiment with analog materials, with physical media, you can arrive at solutions that are much more interesting and much more elegant in today's age. And doing is also very important because it involves things like intuition, trial and error. Trial and error is very, very important. Doing many, many iterations of something until you get to the final solution. And the application of a system of ideas. So I spoke about iterations, doing many versions of something. It's very, very common when a designer is creating a logo to design dozens and dozens of versions of it. And you don't see that because it never gets shown. But that's necessary in order to have an idea grow, right? So something that I included here is try not to become too attached to your first idea going forward, everyone. Because our first ideas are often the weakest ones, and they need work and they need a lot of polishing. So this is very, very important, not to fall in love with our first idea. And design is a long, long process. Here you have the logo for an airline, and these are the final stages, but still, even in the final stages, there are many, many possible versions of what that logo could look like, not just in shape, but in color and typography and spacing, and so many other aspects. And finally, something very important I want to add going forward, the word critique. Critique is a very, very important part of design, and critique doesn't mean criticism in a negative way, but it means an honest look at our work, at ourselves, and at the work of others, and asking ourselves, is this good enough? Does this solve the problem? Does this solve the problem in an interesting way, in an aesthetic manner? And I'm going to be critiquing your work every single week. And one of the important things about critique is honesty, and I would say constructive honesty. So I really look forward to seeing the work you guys are all going to produce in this class, and I want you guys to really take my critique and apply that. And it's important to be able to, as designers, to be able to critique other people's work, and also be able to have our work be critiqued by others, and not, let's say, be offended or being upset if something perhaps didn't work as well as we thought it was going to. So forms of critique: dialogue with a professor, reviews by peers or classmates, and I think the most important one is self-critique. Now, when we critique, we can't just say, I don't like that, or that's not working well. We have to use the language of design. So why do we like it? Specifically referring to the language of design, talking about the principles of organization. So a model of critique, we're going to do a lot of critiquing in this class. We're going to do that on a weekly basis. And I'm going to use the critique not just to push you all towards better work, but also teach a little bit to you all about the importance of critique, and give you my critiques as a model for you all to apply your critique to your work and the work of others. So that having been said, I really look forward to the next couple of weeks, and let's get started.